Greetings! This time on In the Workshop, I'll be going into a little bit more detail on my disc sander. But before getting into that, I wanted to cover one more thing about my ultimate sanding block. I know you're probably getting sick of the ultimate sanding block by now, but this is important. See, on this one, I didn't write off, so I don't really know which way to push it. There we go. The thing about this one is, and what makes it different, is that I made it like the other one, the regular one, but then I took a 5-inch disc, sanding disc, for my random morbid sander. I traced around it, and then I took it and I sanded it to that shape so that this one uses those sanding discs. Just fold it around like the regular paper, and away you go. That's really convenient because these sanding discs are already made up and readily available. In the case of these ones, the hook and loop ones, they got a little bit of padding on there also, which makes it good. One problem with these though is the holes that are in here sometimes will snag on materials. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I did get the plans finished for my drill press cabinet, and they're available on my website. So last week I showed my sanding station, and in that video, what I really wanted to do was take a little bit of time out to show the disc sander as well, but when I got the video done, I found that it was a little bit long, so I left out the parts covering the disc sander itself. So I'm going to go into that now. The most frequent question I get about this sander is whether there are plans for it. The fact is, it's made with a special motor, a motor that came from a treadmill. So making plans for this disc sander wouldn't be very useful to people that didn't have that motor. At some point in the future, I want to make a new one, especially for metalworking, although it can be used for woodworking, and I'll do a project and plans for that one. Another question I often get is, how did I make the trunnions for the table? It shows it a little bit in the video and on the website article, but some people have a problem following that. What I recommend is to use a different kind of table adjustment method, and I'll show that on my 1-inch belt sander. Here we can see that my belt sander actually has two tables that adjust. The first one is for the 1-inch belt, and that can be set to any angle between 90 and above to steeper than 45 degrees. I think it's like 50 degrees that can be set to. But the thing about it is, it doesn't have trunnions. What it has is a slot. I'll remove this screw so you get a better look. It has a slot that's cut in it, and that allows you to adjust the table and move it in and out in relationship to the belt. Now over here on the disc, it's basically the same thing. You loosen the knobs on the sides, then you can adjust the table to the correct angle, move it in as close to the disc as you want to, and then tighten the knobs and you're set. The trunnions make it a little bit more easy to adjust the table, and obviously it looks more professional. But like I say, it'll work without it, so I wouldn't bother. On the new one that I make, I'm not going to go to the trouble of making trunnions at all. I'm going to do it in the same way as I did the 1-inch belt sander. Another question I often get is, how is the sandpaper stuck on the wheel? And what I use are self-adhesive sanding discs that I buy ready-made for a 12-inch disc sander. Here's the new one that I'm getting ready to put on to replace this one that's worn out. And it comes like this, and it's got a removable film on the back here. Just peel that off and you stick it on. Now, removing the discs from these can be a little bit tricky. They have a tendency to leave some of the stuff, the stickiness, on the platen. So Ron Walters had a video about a year ago, I guess, and in it he recommended using a heat gun to loosen the adhesive on the disc, and I'm going to give that a try now. Yeah, it seems to be working well. Certainly a lot better and easier than the last time I changed this disc. It's also creating a kind of an interesting smell in here. Last time I had a bit of an adhesion problem. The disc didn't stick in a couple of places, so to make sure that doesn't happen again, I'm cleaning what's left on here with lacquer thinner. In case you're wondering, lacquer thinner doesn't hurt the melamine at all. Another question I get asked quite often is, how did I make the guard that goes around here? It's actually made with short pieces of wood cut at a very slight angle. I cut one long strip, cut them to length, and then individually glued and nailed them onto the ring at the back here. Here, I've come in for a closer look, and you can see that they're about 3/4 of an inch wide, and I think I cut it at about a 2-degree angle. You can see some of them are open where the angle wasn't exactly 100% correct, but it still does the same thing. Originally I was going to use a piece of metal to go around here, but I didn't think it looked right with the rest of the sander, so I used wood instead. If I had to do this again, I don't think I'd be doing it this way since it was a lot of work. Now that the disc is all clean, I'm going to check to make sure everything is still good here. About a year ago, I had the pulley that's behind here that this platen is screwed onto. That came loose, and I had to take the platen off by removing these screws, and I also had bolts in there before. And then the platen comes off, and I could retighten the set screw on the pulley. I'm going to check that now to make sure everything is good. At that time, I put some epoxy on the set screw to make sure it doesn't come loose again, and it seems to be working fine. Okay, now the disc is clean and everything's ready. I can put the disc on. I'm just going to peel off the plastic film and carefully line it up with the platen. But it doesn't have to be perfect. If it overshoots a little bit on one side, that's not a big deal. I think I'm pretty good here. Let's put it on and then press it in lightly all the way around. Make sure I don't have any wrinkles in it, and then I can really press it on here. I think that's one of the things I did wrong last time also. I just stuck it on and walked away, and it didn't actually adhere. There are other ways to do this. You can glue the sandpaper on. The advantage to this is that it doesn't have any seams. It's going to be hard to find a piece of sandpaper this big. Another option is, if you can't get this at all, there's at a lot of hardware stores or rental places, you can rent floor sanders, and they sell big sanding pads for some of their pad sanders, and they're self-adhesive as well. And I think they're about 16 by 20 or 18 by 20, whatever the size, but you'll probably get one out of this, plus you can make up some hand sanders also with that. And that's a reasonable alternative to buying these. This one is 80 grit. That's all I use on here. I don't see any point in getting any finer grit because it'll wear out and clog up too fast. You generally don't do any finish sanding on this. It's more for roughing in shapes and getting it close. Then you do your finish sanding with either by hand or on the belt sander. Another point about making one of these, if you were to make one of these yourself, you want to have something for the platen that has a little bit of give to it, because it's going to be very nearly impossible to get this 100% flat. You're always going to have a little bit of wobble. This one, I managed to get it very, very close by packing behind there with slips of paper, but it still does have some wobble. The point of having the platen so that it has some flex and give to it is that when you put your work against it, it'll actually push in and compensate for that wobble. This is 1/2 inch melamine, and I think that's perfect for this. Another thing I asked is if I have a degree scale on the table itself to change the angle. I just use this little square here that came with my miter saw to set that up and just check to make sure it's 90 degrees. I have very rarely change the angle on this to something other than 90. Another question I'm asked is whether it gets hot while I'm using it with the motor inside this wooden box. As you can see, I've got some ventilation holes here on this side, and they're the same on the other side. Also, the back of the unit is open on the inside here, and air can pass through on the bottom, and there's some more ventilation holes on the side at the back here. An important thing to remember with this type of sander is that you're not going to be standing in front of it for an hour or so, so it's not really going to get a chance to get hot. I typically use this for a minute or two at a time, and then I turn it off, and the motor hasn't even gotten warm, let alone hot. That's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching. Tomorrow morning I have a new video, and it is on making a wooden mallet. It's not this one. The one that I made is still drying. It's covered with urethane, so I can't pick it up. But check this out tomorrow morning. Interesting video, interesting project. I'm going to try that one more time. Why not? You tried everything else 100 times. Why are you using a chisel when you got a